Scenarios testing for SNMP is a way to extend and give you some more flexibility to test arbitrary MIB objects using SNMP. Currently, or before this feature was added, CDRouter had an SNMP module that provided a number of test cases to verify SNMP functionality overall with exercising the protocol, making sure that the device you're testing will accept and process various SNMP requests correctly, handle error conditions, and so forth. Most of those tests are written with a few very specific MIB objects that are supported pretty universally, but they don't allow you to extend them to test other MIB objects or to test any kind of arbitrary object ID that you might want to test or to query. So what this allows you to do, it's a lightweight, the scenarios testing is a lightweight sort of a script that you can write to have CDRouter send SNMP requests like get requests, get next requests, or set requests to your device, where you can specify the object IDs that it requests, and you can verify the response that is returned by the device to verify whether it returned the value that you expected it to. So to get started with writing SNMP scenarios, first you'll need to create a scenarios file. What a scenarios file is basically the script that contains a list of all of the requests that you want to issue. And for each request, for each scenario that you enter into a file, you can include any number of requests within that scenario. So there's one scenarios file that's used in any given test run. That file contains one or more scenarios, where a scenario is a collection of requests. So here in the example, this is just sort of a template. You can see there's one scenario defined at the top that contains a couple of requests, and then followed by another one that can contain any number of other requests, and so on and so forth. So within each scenario, you can have multiple requests. And so in this example, we have a get requests example where the scenario contains two get requests, each one requesting a single object identifier. And each of these get requests, for the object identifier that it requests, there's a verify subcommand, which basically tells CDRouter, once you get a response for this get request, check what the value is and issue a pass or fail result based on that verification. So in the first instance, the get request is requesting the syscontact object ID, and the verify string verifies the numerical version of that object identifier. That's necessary. You need to specify the numerical version of the object ID that you requested. And then the last portion is the keyword any in square brackets. That syntax means verify that any value comes back, basically meaning that the device supports this object identifier, regardless of what value it has. In the second instance, we do a very similar thing. We're requesting an object identifier. This happens to be the if admin status, the if operational status from the interfaces table. And instead of the any keyword for the verification, we issue there's a keyword called accept, where you can give it a list of possible values that can be valid for this object identifier. And as long as the device returns one of these values, then this particular request will pass in your test results. So in this particular example, this scenario issues two get requests, and as long as the verify criteria for each of them is successful, then the entire scenario will get a pass a pass status in that test. I should note, just like the other SNMP tests that the SNMP test module that CDRouter supports, the SNMP scenarios testing feature is also based on the net SNMP the net SNMP library package, which is an open source SNMP package CDRouter uses for issuing requests and parsing results. So the methods used to generate the requests and to do the MIB lookups and translation is leveraged by CDRouter for the SNMP scenario testing. And so that's why when doing the verify, you'll sometimes see in this example that for the accept line verification, the output of those commands, the output of the net SNMP library is either up with the 1 in parentheses because that's an enumeration, or the other enumeration is down with the number 2 in parentheses, and that format is used to match what the expected value is. So you may need to do some experimentation with actually getting the requests manually from the device to match up with to get a correct, or to get a verify string that's going to work correctly for your device. This next example just uses a SNMP get next request. Get next requests in SNMP are just like get requests, except they tell the device to return the object identifier instance that occurs immediately after the one that you've specified. So in this case, we send 3 object identifiers in the same request. We send the get next request asks for the syscontact, sysname, and syslocation objects. These are not object instances, these are just the object names themselves, and because they are scalars, they have an instance value of 0. So what we expect in our verify strings are the single instances of each of these objects. So where syscontact is the 4th object in the system group, the first verify line has .4.0, that's the object instance, which is what occurs next after the object definition. And likewise for sysname, 5.0 is the instance, and for syslocation, 6.0 is the instance. And we verify, in this case, that they contain an exact value, in double quotes here, for each of these objects. So the value returned by the device for each of these objects must exactly match the string that's shown here in the verify criteria. The SNMP scenarios testing feature also supports SNMP set requests. Here we have a scenario with 2 set requests. The first one is setting the syscontact object instance to a different string than we saw before. The syntax for this is similar to the GET request, where you have the keyword OID with the object identifier and then that is followed by the value that you want this to set the object to, and then followed by the type specification for that object. So in this case, syscontact is defined as an object identifier. Is an octet string. And we specify a string CDRouter test-contact as the value that we want to set. And then the keyword string in all caps tells CDRouter to encode this object as an octet string, translating what appears in double quotes into a binary format. Or an ASCII format. Other encoding formats for strings are available, such as a hex string or a decimal string, where you can specify the actual hex characters or hex digits for each character in the octet string that you want to set. And the net SNMP libraries will do the encoding correctly based on the type string or the type identifier that you specify in your set request. Those are explained, all of this information is explained in the SNMP add-on user guide on the QA Cafe support site, which I'll show you later in the presentation. The next set request in this example is an integer object. It's the ifAdminStatus object. In this case, we are setting the value to 2, which is the ifAdminStatus object is an enumerated integer. It accepts a limited number of integer values. In this case, 2 represents the down enumeration, so it would cause the interface to transition to the down state. Just like above, we specify the OID keyword, the object ID for ifAdminStatus, the number 2, which is the value we want to set it to, and then the type identifier integer. Lastly, the scenarios file can contain a SNMP table command. SNMP table is a CLI command offered by the net SNMP package. It requires an OID that corresponds to an SNMP table definition. So in this case, we've specified the if table object. This will cause the SNMP scenario, when this is run, CDRouter will issue a series of requests to retrieve all of the objects in the if table, under the if table object, all of the instances that are supported by the device, and it will present those as a table. And this can be used to verify that the device supports all of the objects under the table, within that table. So once you've created an SNMP scenarios file, again, that's just a text file in the format that we've just seen. Once you've saved that, you'll need to update your CDRouter config file to specify where this file exists so that CDRouter can read it. You specify the location of this, the SNMP scenarios file using the test var SNMP scenario path. That is in the SNMP scenarios section of the CDRouter config file. So you won't see this section in any existing config files if you've just recently updated to CDRouter 10.1. So what you'll need to do is either create a new config file, or you can upgrade your config file using the upgrade button in the web interface. Once you upgrade your config file, the upgrade process adds any new test vars that may have been introduced since the most recent upgrade of your CDRouter version. And then once you've done that, you'll see this section in your config file. And then you can uncomment the SNMP scenario path and update the value to the location of the file that you just created, containing all your SNMP scenarios. The other test vars are used for specifying how the scenarios are run. SNMP scenario single mode specifies whether or not CDRouter runs all of the scenarios all at once or runs them in one at a time, which is what's called single mode. And I'll show you an example of this next. So once you've specified the location of your scenario file, you can run the scenarios using the SNMP scenario_1 test case, which is found in this SNMP module. So let's go to here we have the CDRouter web interface. Here's an example config file, and if you go into the SNMP section for SNMP add-ons, you'll find all of the other test vars necessary for configuring SNMP. This is a prerequisite for any SNMP testing. You'll need to configure various SNMP users and the SNMP version number that your device supports and so forth. So once you've configured those options and your permissions for querying your device, you can then go in and configure SNMP scenarios. So here we've defined the SNMP scenario path and given it the location of our file right here. So in the packages section, this is where you can update your test package to run SNMP scenarios. After upgrading to 10.1, CDRouter 10.1, in the SNMP section, you'll now find an SNMP scenarios.tcl module. This contains one test, which is the SNMP scenario 1 test. This test is used for executing all of the scenarios in the SNMP scenarios file that we created earlier and that you've specified in your config file. So when you add this test to your test list, as you can see down here, running this test will cause CDRouter to read in all of your scenarios and execute each of those requests within each scenario. Now by default, adding this test case to your script will run all of these scenarios in order. So assuming, if for instance you have 3 scenarios defined in your scenarios file, and each of those scenarios contains 5 different requests, CDRouter will run the first scenario and run all 5 requests, and within the same test execution, it will follow that up with the 5 requests from the next scenario, followed by the third scenario. And all of those tests and requests will be run, and then the end result will be the result of all three scenarios together. That's the default mode that CDRouter runs in. And you'll get a result that looks like this. So this is where we have a single execution of SNMP scenario, and all of the scenarios were run in that execution. The alternate method of running the scenarios test is to set the SNMP scenario single mode test var to yes. This puts CDRouter in single mode when running your scenarios file, and so when single mode is set to yes, the SNMP scenario 1 test will only run a single scenario at any given execution. So the first time the test runs, it will execute the first scenario that appears in your scenario file. In order to get it to run the other scenarios in your file, you need to update your test package to repeat the test case multiple times. That can be done if we go back into our package and select Edit Options. If we update the test package to repeat the test case some number of times, you'll want to repeat the test at least the number of times, at least as many times as you have scenarios. So if you have 3 scenarios defined in your file, you want to repeat the test case at least 3 times. If we repeat it more times than that, then CDRouter will cycle through each scenario. It'll run it once for each time you repeat the test case, and then it'll cycle back and repeat the test cases again. So if we run it 6 times, it'll run the first scenario, second scenario, third scenario, then start again at the first scenario, and so forth. And so when you do that, CDRouter will run the test case. It'll repeat the test case multiple times, and in each of these instances, a different scenario from the file was run. So in the first one, the first scenario is run in the top one. Next, we ran the second scenario in the file, the third scenario, and if we only had 3 scenarios defined, this last one would have run the first one again. And we can see doing this allows us to get a pass-fail result for each individual scenario rather than getting the overall result of all scenarios together for the test case result. So here we have an example. I'm going to So here I'm going to show our scenarios file. So in this example, we have a GET request example that does a GET request, followed by another GET request with multiple object identifiers and verify, followed by a GET next request example, followed by a SET request example. One thing I'm going to point out, the SNMP scenarios file can contain log messages. So you can insert a custom log message. This will appear in your test results. And you can also insert an arbitrary delay in milliseconds. And this will cause the scenarios test to pause before running the next test. So here's our SET request example and an SNMP table example. And so what this looks like when CDRouter runs it, we'll look at our test log. And here we are not running in single mode, so we're going to run through all scenarios all at once. And you can see there's a section header for each scenario. So here's our GET request example. And then the first command in that example was a GET request, and with some information about what we're going to be requesting. And then we actually issue the SNMP GET request below. And you can see here, the GET request is sent and the response from the device. Once we receive a response, CDRouter logs the result or displays the result here, and you get a pass status because a response was received, and a pass status here showing that the verification was successful. And in this case, we were looking to see that the object existed because we used the keyword any. The next section shows the next GET request in the first scenario, and then we issue the GET request. That's this GET request here. And in this case, we're looking for accept either of these two values. So here, it verified that each of these values has one of those two values that we specified in our scenario file. And the rest of the log file continues on like this. So this gives you a very lightweight, easy way to test arbitrary MIB objects. CDRouter comes bundled with the MIB modules that are supplied with the SNMP, with the net SNMP package. You can find those in So the user CDRouter share MIBs directory is where all of the SNMP MIBs can be found. You can add additional MIBs into this directory, and CDRouter will be able to use them in your scenarios file to test whatever instances that your device may support. And so that's a way that you can expand your SNMP testing in a very quick and easy way using this scenario scripting. So once you've run those tests, you can see your results and verify that the device is returning the values that you expect, as they're written in your scenarios file. And that's the basics of getting SNMP scenarios up and running in your test environment.